the television network that we worked for, moved us to Dallas.
Right.
And that was another change because in New York, it's hustle bustle. Everybody's in their own lane. Get on the subway and don't look at anybody. Don't talk to anybody. Nobody's looking at anybody else. To moving to Dallas, and you're pumping gas and the person across from you saying, "Hey, how's your day going?" And you're looking at them like,
I don't know you.
I wouldn't have been that person if I hadn't just spent a year living in New York. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Girlie Ladies. I'm Sanji.
Hey, and I'm KJ. Welcome.
Welcome, welcome. Welcome to our conversation once again. And I am super excited about what we're going to talk about today, our experiences across the country. Yeah, because I'm a Baltimore gal, straight out of Baltimore, but I am living here in Texas. And so I want to talk about how I got here and all the places I landed along the way. What about you, KJ?
Nice. Well, I was born and raised in Massachusetts, small little town. It's not so small anymore, but yes, small town, and moved to Georgia outside of Atlanta. And now I am here in Texas. I'm in the Houston area. So yes, I've lived in a few places.
Yeah, so let's take a trip across America, north, south, east, and west, and let's go. So, like I said, I grew up in Baltimore, born in the late 60s, grew up in the 70s and 80s, and grew up eating crabs and fish and soul food and just enjoying the culture, the people. You know, we have a really great city that's on the harbor. So, those of you who haven't been to Baltimore, go to Baltimore and go to the Inner Harbor because you can get some great food and be right there on the water. A lot of water activities and things like that. But I just love my people from Baltimore, and I'm excited to always go back. And I know that you were just north of me in Massachusetts.
Yes. So I was born in the 70s. The town that I was raised in was Bridgewater. It was a very small town, so small that our high school was Bridgewater, and then the other town near us, Raynham. So the school's called Bridgewater Raynham Regional High School. So two towns that are that small had to combine their high school. So yeah, it was really nice. The street that I grew up on, pretty cool because we had a farm across from us. They had Afghan dogs, horses, and cows. And then there was another farm down the street from us that also had cows, and they did a lot of apple cider, and you could go and purchase from them. So it's kind of neat to know that, like, you grew up someplace that rural. Now, unfortunately, they've taken a lot of that land and they've put what we call McMansions everywhere. But it was really cool, like in the wintertime, to go sledding down the hill in our backyard. Unfortunately, now all of that is home. So it's really changed quite a bit, but very small town. A lot of people ask me, what's it like to be from Massachusetts? Because they've either never heard of it or don't know how to pronounce it, or you didn't think that Black people lived there. So that's what I get quite a bit from Massachusetts. I will tell you this, in my town, there were only 10 Black families. And for my brothers, I have two older brothers. My oldest, when he graduated, there were six Black children in that class. Then my other older brother, when he graduated, that was the most ever, 11. When I graduated, it was only myself from grade, like nursery school, all the way through 11th grade. Finally, 12th grade, there was a young guy who came in from a couple of towns over. And it was almost, Sanji, like modern day busing, where they got kids from a couple of towns over and started bringing them into the school. So my graduating class, it was myself and one other guy. And I mean,
Boy,
yeah. So people always ask me that, like, what's it like to be Black and from Massachusetts? And I would say that I didn't have the same experience, I think, as a lot of people did. For us, our family were in New Jersey and then also Virginia. So we would travel to go see them, at certain points. But just in that town, having only 10 Black families, one thing I will say, we all knew each other. So that was good. But it was different. I think there was, I hate to talk about racism, but the obvious is it's going to be there. And I'm also like a deeper skinned person. So you can only imagine the things that I was called and had to deal with, kids spitting, from the top of the stairs at me as I'm walking down the stairs, and then sympathetic girls getting the lungies out of my hair that, people spit. So a lot of things like that, but I don't want to just say that everything was bad. I honestly would not change a thing. I would have grown up there all over again if I had to go through it. But it was tough being the only one. But I think it also made me to the point where I'm comfortable around a lot of people. One thing about the street that I lived on, like my little area behind us, there was a family. The mom was Vietnamese and their dad was white, and they had three daughters. And so I was friends with the oldest daughter. So when I went there, she actually didn't speak any English. She only spoke Vietnamese. So she was talking to her daughters. We would all sit, play with dolls, and do things. And so she would come and she would say something to them. I'm like, well, what'd she say? And they say, just do what we do. So it was basically time to clean up and eat dinner. So she fed me. She basically, treated me like I was her child. So, Asian cuisine is something that like I love. It's big in Massachusetts with having the second largest Chinatown. I think that that culture, like I feel like that's a part of my culture. Even so, to the point where when I would work in Boston, some people thought, like in the Asian community, they would ask me, because of my features, are you Chinese? And I'd say, no, I'm not. And they're like, you sure? So I asked my mother because I get a lot of the features from her. Like it's more of the eye shape that people were going for. So I asked her about it and I said, you really need to try to like figure that out in your roots. Like it has to be somewhere, I feel like, for even Asian people to ask me that question. But yeah, I would say that just being around so many cultures, it's a good thing. And it makes me comfortable around people. I don't know, how is Baltimore as far as like the mix of, different backgrounds and culture?
We are very mixed, and everyone getting along for the most part. I don't recall any real racial issues growing up. But things have popped up in our city with the police department, obviously doing some over policing. And anybody who watched the TV show The Wire knows what that was all about and what was going on. But it's a really good mix of black and white and Italian and Jewish and just a whole bunch of things people mixed in together. And so, like you, I grew up the same way as the only one. I went to a private school in it's called Brooklynville, Maryland, which is in the Pikesville area outside of Baltimore, called the Park School. And I started there in first grade, and I was the only Black girl in the class. And there was one other Black male in the class. And I remained the only Black girl in the class until sixth grade. So, first grade, second grade, third grade, all the way up until sixth grade, another Black girl came. And then in seventh grade, another Black girl came. And then in eighth grade, another Black girl came. And so by the time I graduated from that school, there were five of us in the class who were African American. It was two boys and three girls total because some people came, some people left. But it was a predominantly Jewish school. The school and I believe it still is, 85% Jewish. That's how it was at the time. So I grew up being raised as a Black Jewish girl. And so it was really cool and exciting for me because, being a Christian, but being raised around mostly Jewish people, I've always had and still do have an affinity towards Jewish people because those were my peeps growing up. Going to Hebrew school with them, celebrating all of the holidays. I still can do the Jewish prayer, the Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. Like I
My God.
because that's how I was raised. So that was a really, really big part of my life.
Did you
So
have
yeah,
the
no.
bat mitzvah? It's bat mitzvah for girls, right?
Right. So there was the bat mitzvah for the girls and the bar mitzvah for
For
the
the
guys. But
boys.
no, I was Christian.
Okay.
Oh no, no, but I went to everybody's bar mitzvah, everybody's bat mitzvah. And when there was a conflict where there were two going on the same day, it was like, oh, okay, what do we do? And we did have that situation once where there was a boy who was having a bar mitzvah on the same day as a bat mitzvah. And so the girls went to the bat mitzvah and the boys went to the bar mitzvah. But that family held the big party together that evening for both. And so that was really cool. So, no, though that was my upbringing, being the Black Jewish girl in Baltimore, and still keep in touch with a lot of my friends through Facebook and so forth. But that was me. But so no, I know what it's like to be the only one, but I can say I never once felt like I was being treated any differently. If anything, I was being treated special because I was the Black girl in the class.
Cool. I dealt with things like I think that are people's nightmares, those wanting, oh, can I touch your hair? Or either just touching it and not even asking, and then saying, wow, it's really soft. You'd think it would be like a Brillo pad, just like awkward things like that, or no one wanting to sit with me on the bus and always being by myself. So I would say that a lot of it was very isolated. And even though I did, end up having friends, there was just still so much. I think, like, even with my particular elementary school that I went to, Bridgewater State College is really well known, and that was hooked onto my elementary school, Burnell. So a lot of the interns, like, they were going to college and they would come and be student teachers, and even they would make comments or just be cruel. So I think that's unfortunately a lot of what I remember growing up, to the point where I used to cry and ask my dad, like, why did you move here? What made you want to come here? And, we're being treated like this. But my dad was all about education because his mom, my grandmother, only went to school to the fourth grade and then she didn't finish. And unfortunately, that's kind of how it was then. And she wanted more for her children. So she pushed my father. She pushed him to get an education. She pushed him to get out of New Jersey. And he decided that, he wanted to go to Massachusetts because there was MIT, there was Tufts, there was Harvard, there were all these great schools. And he says, I want my kids to have access to great education. Kind of the funny thing is, then both boys went to Morehouse. So,
Morehouse.
yeah, so he, moved up there. But of course, once they said where they wanted to go, he wasn't upset. But I know that both my brothers, their decision wasn't just because Morehouse is a great school, but it was also because of the way we were raised. They really wanted to start to be around more people that look like us. I think for them, it was harder where they just, and I don't know if that has to do with being like young Black men, but just wanting to be around more people that look like them. For me, I can pretty much go with anything. With Massachusetts, I feel like the culture, that's one of the things that I love. So nobody really knows this about me. I'll kind of dive into a little bit. My mother plays piano, and I watched her like when I was 3 years old. And as soon as she would get off the piano, my dad said I would get on and I would start playing everything that she just played. So he kept watching this. And then I turned 4. This still went on. So they got me a music school teacher and I started going. And then eventually this teacher said, she needs to go further. I can only do so much with her. You need to enroll her into something else. So I went to the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston and I studied music and I also did a little bit of opera singing.
Oh my
And
goodness.
yes, I did that for credit, the opera singing. So don't ask me to sing. It's not something that I do.
I was going to say, bust out a few notes for us.
No. But yeah, I studied music for a long time. So I love classical music. In my town, we didn't actually have like an R&B radio station. There was easy listening at the time, which easy listening, for those who may not know, is kind of like light rock, Toto, Asia, that kind of music. Um, so I liked a lot of, rock music. I was raised on that, especially again with the kids I went to school with. I can sing Def Leppard and Van Halen and all. I know the words to all that stuff.
Yeah, Led
Yeah,
Zeppelin, Van
yeah.
Halen, all of those. Yeah,
Like
I know.
that's my music. I know it. And then we had like pop. So, having any type of R&B, we didn't get it until Sunday night. So here's my little Wendy Williams story for those who know her. She was a DJ. Wendy Williams, and then she was a TV show host. She had her own TV show as well. Wendy went to Northeastern, which is in Boston. She did a radio station show. It was for 4 hours every Sunday night that came out of Rhode Island. And so we were able to hear that. And that's when I would hear R&B music. So I remember Wendy from back then as like a teenager. That's so crazy that, to see her come full circle from, going to school, like basically for journalism and then, becoming radio and then having a TV show. So kudos to her. But yeah, that's kind of how the music was. Again, I think my brothers, when we would go to New Jersey, they would just take like buy those blank cassette tapes. Remember how they came in like a long package? They would buy so many of those and they would turn on the radio in Trenton and just put the cassettes in and just keep the radio going so that they could bring all of that music back with them. But for me, I was not into rap or anything like that. I was into like whatever was playing there in Massachusetts. So again, I think just having that wide culture, that's the part that I wouldn't trade for anything. The racial part was tough. I wouldn't want to go through that again, but sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I grew up in that
Right.
time, so I feel like that's something that made me stronger.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Even though I was, like you described, in the white world, or in my case, the Jewish world, my parents who grew up during the civil rights era, both went to HBCUs. They were into Black culture, even though they put me in a different environment and put my brother in a different environment. When coming home, I still was a part of the Black community, living in Baltimore in a Black neighborhood, going to the Black church. And we did listen to the Black radio station. At the time, it was called V103 in Baltimore. And so, yeah, so I did still have, I had this kind of mix of culture going home to Baltimore City and living in the Black culture. And then during the day, going to the Park School out in the county of Baltimore and experiencing a different culture. So a lot of people coming out of Park School went on to University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And so that was me. I was like, okay, I'm going to go to Penn also. So that's how I ended up in Philadelphia. And things were a little different on college campuses. And I'm not sure whether it's still this way at Penn or whether it's still going on college campuses, because I have one son who's at an HBCU and one son who's currently at a large PWI in Louisiana. And so, but at the time when I was going to college in Pennsylvania, there was no mixing of races on campus. And so you had to make a conscious decision whether you were going to be part of the Black community at Penn or whether you were going to be part of the broader community at Penn. And so this was my opportunity because I had spent so much time in, being the only one or being one of the few in school who looked like me. This was my opportunity to really experience Black culture. So at Penn, that was most of what I affiliated with. And Philadelphia, I really, really loved being in Philly. I appreciated more than I did back then because at the time, I mean, we were in the heart of West Philadelphia going to Penn. And so I can tell you the people of Philadelphia are very tough. They're really tough people. Those girls, those women, strong women. The women in Baltimore are strong, but the women in Philly are really strong. But I enjoyed being in Philly for the 4 years that I was at Penn. Really enjoyed the food there, really enjoyed the cheesesteaks that they have. No one can make a cheesesteak like they do in Philly. And even some good seafood in Philly. But it's the people there are real strong, real tough. I don't know if you've been to Philly. Have you ever
I
been to Philly?
haven't. No.
Yeah, it's I enjoy it. I know that's where the Liberty Bell is and there's a lot of history there. So it's definitely a place that I would recommend going to visit. West Philadelphia, there's South Philly, there's North Philly. I worked in the North Philly area at a TV station when I first got into television news. So that was really cool to experience that culture. So, when was the first time that you moved from the Boston or Massachusetts area out of state and had to actually live in a different environment?
So definitely in the 90s. Um, Before that, I will say that like sometimes my mom's mom lived with us. So my maternal grandmother, she lived with us and her family were still in Virginia. So sometimes she and I, for the whole summer, we would go together and fly to Petersburg, Virginia, and just stay for the summer. So I do love Virginia as well. I kind of count that as seeing something different because we would stay, for my whole school break and then come back. So that was pretty cool. But yes, I did move in the 90s, like mid 90s to Atlanta. Outside of Atlanta, for those who are kind of familiar with the area, a lot of people have heard of Decatur because it's right before Stone Mountain, which is where Dr. King, like they put a bell there in Stone Mountain in his honor. But it was Clarkston, then Decatur, and then Stone Mountain. So I moved to Clarkston and big culture shock. That's like the nicest way for me to say it because coming from, I think, one extreme and then going to another. Here I am coming from predominantly white or like sort of kind of other cultures, then going to predominantly Black. Basically, really, I wouldn't even say predominantly, like it was that area was all Black. So that was a culture shock for me. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm anti Black. It's nothing like that. It just that was such a big shock because most of the time in Massachusetts where I would see Black people was on Sundays, when we would go to church. We went to a couple of towns over to a predominantly Black church. But then to just go to seeing Black people day in, day out and just completely different, I had to get used to that. And I think it's something that I never quite got used to, the type of people that I was around. So to kind of give you an example, it was a difference where people would ask me, "Oh, well, you talk weird. Like you talk like you're white. Where are you from?" And so I would kind of look like, "Whoa, I talk like what? Do you not understand English?"
Yeah, it's the you
So
ain't really Black.
yes. So, it was a lot of, well, where are you from? And making these faces. And then, so I would say, well, I'm from New England. Oh my God, I ain't never met nobody from England before. And I was like, oh.
No.
Then people like, oh, you're British?
Wow.
Yeah. Then it was like, oh, you're like from Caribbean area, right? No, I'm from Massachusetts. Massachusetts? Massachusetts. So it was very different for me in trying to explain where I'm from, but then also having people not like me just because I'm from there. That's what's weird to me is I've met so many people over time that disliked me because I was different from them. So
Yeah.
that's not the attitude that I went into when I moved to Georgia. But then to meet people that really hated me. And I know that's a strong word, but hated me because I was not where they're from and they thought that I felt I was better. And that's not the case. It's like you have to understand that my parents moved to Massachusetts and that's where we live. It was not, I chose to live there. That's where I was born and raised. So you're upset with me and you feel like I feel that I'm better than you. That doesn't make sense to me. So as people say nowadays, make it make sense. That's how I felt. Like you're upset because I lived someplace and that's not, I didn't have a choice. Like that's where I was born. But you feel that, somehow I'm acting like I'm better than you. And that's what I dealt with quite a bit. I lived in Georgia twice. I took a very quick break to move with a company that I was working for and help open up some concept stores in New York. And I lived in New York for almost 2 years. But during that period, 9/11 happened. And I really felt uncomfortable being there because I don't know if you remember, but right after 9/11, then like the week after, there was a small plane that ran into some houses. And that was right around the corner from where I was living. And I just thought to myself, if anything's going to go wrong and something bad is going to happen, it's like New York is always going to be a target. And I felt like it's time for me to leave. And I talked to my mom and I just said, you know what? I need to come back. I can't be here with all of this going on. I have to get back. So I made that decision to not stay there and go right back to Georgia. But luckily then not too long after I met my husband. So, it was a good thing to go back. But yeah, I would say I didn't learn New York's culture like long enough. The one thing I will tell you, it was kind of cool that I would see people with my same skin tone, and then I would go to talk to them and have a conversation, and they didn't understand me. And then I learned that they ended up started to speak Spanish. So I met a lot of people from Panama who were very deep skinned and look just like me. But then I'm assuming that I can go and have this conversation and they didn't understand me. So I thought that was pretty cool that there's so many cultures there that you can go and talk to somebody who you feel like you're going to have a conversation with, and then you can't. And it's just like, oh, wow, there's so many different, like, this really is a melting pot. So that was one cool thing about being in New York is just everybody's there.
Yeah, I spent some time. I spent a year living in New York, and it was very, very different for me. Very, very different. But going back to Georgia,
Yes.
because I'm so sorry to hear that your experience in Georgia was not favorable, because I enjoyed living in Georgia and may end up back down there one day.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I loved Georgia. So, how I ended up in Georgia is after I did graduate from the University of Pennsylvania and then went back to Baltimore for a short time because I was in television. That was my major, communications, trying to get into the TV world, really kind of struggling to get in. Was able to go back to Baltimore, and I went to this school called and here's my shirt, the Broadcasting Institute of Maryland. They're not around anymore, but it was a school that kind of helped those who were interested in radio and television to get into the radio and television world. And so even though I had graduated from college, I went to this school as well in Baltimore to kind of learn more practical skills in radio and television. And so I got a job at CNN in Atlanta. And so I had to move from Baltimore to Atlanta. And I remember my parents, and this was in December and just before Christmas. And my parents, even though they had already sent me off to college in Philadelphia, this felt a little different because this felt a little bit more permanent. This felt like I was actually leaving the nest. And so we all did the trek down to Atlanta, took 2 cars, all of my stuff, moved into an apartment. And I just still remember my mother just feeling anxiety because here I was now a northern girl, even though Maryland is below the Mason-Dixon line and we are considered the South, but it's the North in my eyes and in most people's eyes. Moving from the North to the South, there was a little bit of stress and anxiety. And it was right before Christmas. And so, but they were very welcoming. I made friends pretty quickly. Christmas was amazing. I was invited over to several people's homes for Christmas, and that made my parents feel very refreshed because I was only, I was in my early 20s at the time, just having graduated from college. And so I liked the people. And I don't know if it's because those of us who were working at CNN kind of formed our own little sorority fraternity, of people, and took very good care of each other. But going down there and going to the museums, participating in a lot of events and activities, it was very warm and welcoming for me. So I hate to hear that it wasn't as pleasant for you because I loved Atlanta and my son goes to Morehouse, love dear old Morehouse. He's there right now about to graduate and he plans to stay in Atlanta. He's not coming back to Texas. He wants to stay in Atlanta. And like I said, who knows? We may end up down there. So yeah, I'm sorry to hear that that wasn't the best. And I know your family's still there.
Are. My dad eventually moved from Massachusetts and now he's there. My mom is there and I still have a brother that lives there. They all love it. I think for me, and I know that your 20s were like really different from mine with you graduating and going into CNN. For me, continuing to work in retail and going to Georgia in my 20s, I think because like your 20s, you make a lot of mistakes in your life. If you're going to mess up, that's basically the time to do it while you're still very young. So most likely it's because I made a lot of mistakes, chose the wrong people, to give my time to, maybe didn't make the best decisions. And all of that you kind of remember, and it just like really, it stings. I think it puts a scar on you. So I recently, like my dad's there and he has been kind of sick. And so I recently went a few times to Atlanta, like back to back to see him and make sure that everything was okay. It's not so bad going in that aspect, but I could not be back there, I don't think permanently. Um,
Could it
it,
be the place where you lived in Atlanta? Because
so
I lived in Marietta. I don't know
gotcha.
if that was near where you were.
Yeah, the first time that I moved there, again, it was Clarkston, and no, that definitely was not the right place to be.
Okay.
That's where I met a lot of people who, again, just they thought that I felt like I was better. But then when I moved back, we were living in first McDonough, and then when I met my husband, he had his home in Locust Grove, Georgia, which is going like it's south of Atlanta, like you're going towards Macon.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like basically the Locust Grove was the last town in Henry County, which that county is the last to be considered Atlanta. If that helps those who kind of know the area.
know what you mean. It's like if you're in Atlanta and once you step outside of Atlanta too far, you're
Yes.
in Georgia.
Yeah.
And there's a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with Henry County and us being that last town of the county, Henry County was the last to be considered Atlanta. Then as soon as you hit Butts County, which was like right after us, that was considered going towards Macon, Georgia. So, again, with us living there, I think I loved how rural that area was. For me, Georgia felt very segregated. And I'll explain that because with us living south of Atlanta, it didn't mean there was no money. Not too far from us in Locust Grove, there were $2 million plus homes, all like, in like a cul-de-sac area. So there was a lot of money in like different pockets. You would find those cul-de-sacs with those very expensive homes. So people had money there, but we had to drive an hour and 45 minutes just to go to a Whole Foods or to
Oh,
go to a farmer's market. Everything was on the north side of town, which was crazy because it's like, okay, there's all this money on the south side, but you won't bring it here. Even the malls, like, for anyone who knows Atlanta, everyone knows Lenox Square
yes.
or Phipps Plaza or Perimeter Mall in Dunwoody. So you have all of these beautiful malls on the north side. But then on the south side, there was no malls. It was like South Lake, which was a dump. So I think what I didn't like is the fact that you had to drive over an hour just to go and get something nice or have like a good restaurant or go to a really good grocery store. All of that was like basically catered to the north side, which I know that any city that you go to, usually the north side of town is going to be like the more upscale and the better. But that's what I didn't like until we moved here to Houston. I love this place, minus the weather. It's hot or hotter, so there's no seasons. But when you look at the layout of Houston, wherever you live, they will bring it to you. We're in an area like it's called Uptown. And the cool thing is we have Galleria Mall, we have Memorial City, Sugarland's not that far. Then you have Whole Foods. Like we have about 4 or 5 Whole Foods just like in our area that we can go to. It's crazy. Trader Joe's, all these places that I had only seen north of Atlanta are now like all around us. So I'm just like, wow, this is completely different. I love it.
Yeah. I think Atlanta may have progressed a little bit more since you were there, and
Hmm.
maybe there are more shops and opportunities for people to spend their money,
Yeah.
you know, where it's so that it's not too much of an inconvenience. But I totally understand what you're saying that if you live in a rural area, then yeah, it's going to be tough to be
Yeah.
able to just get the basic things, just getting something as simple as gas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My mom was so excited because, when I told you I went a couple of times to visit my dad when he was sick, and I stayed with my mom, and she says, look to your left, look at that. And so I looked and there was a Costco, and she says, now we don't have to ride so far anymore. She's like, it's just a couple exits up. And I thought, wow. And I mean, when she said Costco and was smiling, that place was huge. So I just thought to myself, wow, okay, finally they're getting it.
Yeah. And then there's also the culture. Did you participate in any of the cultural activities in Atlanta or just going to the King Center or Ebenezer Baptist Church? And, just because there's a lot of history there, obviously,
So
with Martin Luther King, that being his center.
yes, I didn't go to the King Center. I know where it was. I wasn't, a lot of times I would take the bus and it would ride past Ebenezer. So I know that area a little bit. I used to get my hair done not too far from like that whole area. But no, I wasn't into anything like too cultural there. I think I just hated it, and it just stayed with me. It's like, oh, I just want to get out of here. And I was so happy because when I met my husband, he was like tired of it too. there were a lot of job opportunities in Houston, and that's why I came here, and he, was supportive of that. So now that we're here, he loves it too, but I think for both of us, it's just as we're getting older, it's the weather and it being so hot here, and like his form of exercise is he's a runner. So, he's got to get up at like 4 in the morning and try to go running before the heat really kicks in. And, when you're thinking of things like that, it's just like, oh, we kind of need something different. We're getting to that point where we're at the 11-year mark almost. And it's time, I think, to find something else that has some seasons.
So it sounds like that was a good transition for you going from Atlanta to Houston. I think my strangest transition, not necessarily the hardest, but the strangest transition was when I left Atlanta, because I left Atlanta the day of the O.J. Simpson situation when
Oh,
those murders took place, went to go live in L.A. And so that transition from Atlanta to LA, boy, 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 that's a total different scene out there in LA. It's very laid back. The people are going nowhere fast. You could go to a smoothie shop and people are taking their good old time to get stuff ready. Everybody's on the beach there, at least in the community where I was. I was in Culver City, and just, not too far from Santa Monica and the beach cities. Boy, laid back in LA. And so that was a big difference from going from the South to the West Coast. And I lived in LA for 6 years and really started to like it only because the weather was so great. But the weather was really, really cool, even though I would go home to Baltimore for Christmas, every single Christmas. So in the 6 years that I lived there, every Christmas I would go home because celebrating Christmas on the beach just didn't make sense to me.
yeah.
And so I would go home for that. But I did enjoy the weather. I did enjoy the whole beach atmosphere, being able to go to the beach at a moment's notice and spending my weekends totally chilled out. So I enjoyed that. But then the hardest change, because you talked about New York, was when my company moved me from LA to New York. And I got engaged. So that was part of the reason for the transition. I started in a relationship with somebody who was at my company in New York and I was in LA. And so we were at the same company. It was a television network. And I moved from LA to New York. Talk about complete opposites. That was like a major transition for me, going from laid back to total hustle and bustle. Everybody's moving really fast.
Yes.
Nobody's looking at each other. Everybody's in their own lane. It was just really, really fast and moving. Things as simple as cars are a really big deal in LA. Everybody's got to drive a nice car. I can tell you I had my nice black Mercedes when I was living in LA. Going to New York, nobody's driving. Everybody is in a taxi, a subway, a bus, and I'm talking about in the city. And just and I lived in Westchester County and worked in the city and drove in every day and had to park my car, and that car had to stay put because making a decision just to go across town to get your hair done or to go to a restaurant in New York, that you had to think it through. Am I going to walk? Am I going to take a subway? Am I going to take a cab? Like, because you couldn't move that vehicle because that's another $25, $30 to park the vehicle. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like this is too much for me. I don't want to have to think so hard just to go from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Whether I'm going to move my car just to go get my hair done, whereas in LA, that was easy. You just get in your car and go. So I lived in New York for 1 year, just exactly 1 year. And I think I like New York. I think New York is a really great place to visit, but living there, buckle up.
See, you're better than me because I haven't even gone back to visit and I have no plans to. It's funny that you said you were in a relationship. That's actually one of the reasons why I didn't mind going to open some new stores in New York because I was seeing somebody long distance when, they were living in New York and I was in Atlanta. And I felt like, wow, this would be great, to be in the same place. And they were like, well, yeah, I have a townhome. Come and stay with me, don't worry about it. And I talked to my mom and she's like, well, I don't really want you living with somebody, but at least I like this person. Like it's nice. So that's why I went to try to see where that went. And that didn't. It came and went. So
Yeah.
it was like then 9/11 happened and it just seemed like this string of bad, worse, horrible, like, let me get out of here. And I remember during that time too that my mom was so worried because her being in Georgia, she could not connect with me. The phone lines were down for her. My dad was still in Massachusetts. We were able to talk. And my best friend, her dad was in North Carolina. So he was able to connect. So they were both connecting with me and then would talk to my mom. So that would ease her fear. Imagine being a mother and knowing that your child was in that, area where something like that happened and you have no phone connection to them, even though I wasn't involved in it, she still couldn't hear my voice.
Right.
So I would just say like the whole 2 years, basically, I I think that's why like people they take trips to New York. They're like, oh, let's go and let's see the tree lighting and let's go and shop. And I'm like, yeah, good luck with that. Have a great time and I'll see you when you get back. Cause I really have no like a sour taste in my mouth for New York and pretty much for Georgia. Georgia now it's like family and that's why I'm going back. But it's not like, oh, I'm just gonna go and have a girls' weekend and hang out. No, I'll figure out someplace else.
That family connection, like you said, and that's why we ended up in New York visiting because my husband is from New York, and so his family is there, and
Yeah.
so that's how we ended up going back to New York because even though we live in Texas and our kids were born in Texas, they had to go back to see their grandmother and other family members in New York, and we did make sure that they experience some of the cultural things in
Yeah.
New York. We did do the ice skating in Rockefeller
Oh, nice.
Center and, made sure they got to go and through Times Square, go to, what's that there's a toy store. There's a
Theo
famous,
Swart.
yes, we took them there. We took them to Central Park many times, so that they could go and it was snowing. So we have pictures of them in the snow throwing snowballs in Central Park. And that just has to do with exposure. We just always wanted our kids to be exposed to different things. And so New York, especially since that's where their dad's roots were. So we would go back, not just to see family, but just so that they could experience New York City. So they have done that, but totally different from Texas. And our jobs, the television network that we worked for, moved us to Dallas.
Right.
And that was another change because in New York, as I said, it's hustle bustle. Everybody's in their own lane. Get on the subway and don't look at anybody. Don't talk to anybody. Nobody's looking at anybody else. To moving to Dallas and you're pumping gas and the person across from you saying, hey, how's your day going? And you're looking at them like,
I
what do
don't
you
know
want?
you.
I wouldn't have been that person if I hadn't just spent a year living in New York, where I had become the person who was just like in my own lane, don't talk to anybody because everybody's too much going on. And so I had to adjust to the friendliness of Texas, of Dallas. And so this is where we are now. This is where we raised our kids. And so while I don't say I'm a Texas gal, my kids are Texans. And we've been here now for 23 years. And so Texas has become home, and it's very different than Baltimore, very different than Philly, very different than Atlanta, very different from LA, very, very, very different than New York. It's Dallas, Texas, the big D.
Yeah.
And so the one thing I like about it here is that we were able to take our New York salaries down here to Texas. And so our
Real
money
good.
was, yes, and to be able to buy a house that we never could have purchased in New York. There's no way. So I like the fact that the cost of living in Texas is a lot better than it is in some of these other cities.
Yes. And it's the fact that, like, between Dallas, Houston, they're still really great major cities, but you can afford to live. Like, I live in the heart of, I mean, I'm talking our townhome, we're right here, like in the Galleria area. And that's like a really great area to be because you can connect with so many different interstates or go places, and it's not really that far. So I have like a 8-minute commute to work. My husband has 15-minute commute to work, and it's awesome. But yeah, I mean, I think that Texas has a lot to offer. I haven't been to Austin, but I've heard like that's the next up and coming place. And if you love LA and that vibe, that basically that's the LA of, Texas.
Yeah, I've been to Austin visiting. My youngest son is a swimmer, or he was a swimmer. And so, being heavily in the swim world, we did a lot of traveling throughout Texas. So, he was at a championship meet at UT. So, that's right there in Austin. And so, we spent the weekend in Austin and really going around. Really, really nice. They've got a homeless problem there.
Oh,
But really cool, laid back people, very LA ish.
okay.
I found the people of Austin. Spent a lot of time in Houston. Again, in the swim world, I'm a member of Jack and Jill, so we have conferences in Houston, Dallas, kind of going back and forth. San Antonio, we've spent a lot of time in San Antonio just vacationing because they've got a lot of great vacation spots in the San Antonio Hill Country. So that's really cool. What my children have been able to enjoy and experience is Spanish culture down here in Texas, something they may or may not have experienced, let's say, if we had been in Georgia or even in Maryland. So that's a good thing.
I agree. I think between, for me, New York and here, I've had a lot of Spanish culture. But one thing I do miss a lot is the Asian culture. I just feel like in Massachusetts, that was so huge. And that is something that I miss quite a bit because they're my people, always welcoming, always taking me in, always wanting to feed me, and I'm willing to eat. So it's just that's the one thing I miss. It's like being around more of that culture.
Do you eat a lot of Chinese food? Because I do. It's like my favorite.
So are we really eating Chinese food though? Like that's how
Hey,
I
you
feel.
got Chinese people like Chinese food, and it's not the same from place to place. The Chinese
No.
food in Maryland is different than the Chinese food in Texas and in LA and New York.
Yeah.
These are all made by Chinese people, but it's different.
It's completely different. Like coming from that heavily Asian area, especially Chinese in Boston, then to coming here, food's not the same. It's not that great. Service isn't even that good. So that's why I say, is it really the same? Not quite.
It's very different because even like LA to San Francisco, just
Yeah.
going from LA to San Francisco and going to the Chinatown in San Francisco, Chinese food totally different.
I think that's the
You've
number
got,
one Chinatown. Yeah.
yes, it is. And they take their Chinese food very, very seriously there. And you can just go from restaurant to restaurant to restaurant, like all on the same block and really enjoy different cuisines. And then you've got the Hunan and the Cantonese and like whatever just depends on what type of Chinese food you're getting. But I love shrimp egg foo young. Like that's my dish.
You're speaking to my heart, Sanjay. That's like my thing. I love it. Like basically the Chinese omelet. Love it.
Yes, I could eat, and that was the thing growing up. On Fridays, my mother did not cook, much as she was like I've said many times, exceptional cook. But on Fridays, that was her day off, and she would get Chinese food. So we had Chinese food every single Friday growing up. So that was what we got: the egg foo young and shrimp with broccoli. There was the chow mein, and in Maryland they have something called yako mein, which I haven't seen in any other city.
Wow.
So
I've
it's
never heard of
yeah,
that.
yeah, it's like chow mein, but it doesn't have like all the vegetables and stuff that the chow mein has. It's a little lighter and more noodly,
Okay.
and so it's different. It's different. So again, city to city, coast to coast, it's all different. You don't know what you're getting.
Yeah.
So that's why I recommend going city to city and coast to coast.
I
But I haven't
know.
spent much time in the Midwest. I just visited there on a conference, went to Chicago for a conference and spent like I think 3 or 4 days. So it was good to be able to see Lake Michigan and to be able to go to a restaurant there, and went to this place called Harold's Fried Chicken. And so that was good. But I need to do more on the in the Midwest.
It's funny that you say that too, because the current company that I work for, retailer, that's on their list to possibly open there this year. And so I'm already thinking about, is that something that I want to do? Possibly moving. That was one of the places. So we'll see.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
Chicago is very expensive to live.
Yes.
My brother, he basically he has got his MBA. He went, I told you, to Morehouse, but then he also went to University of Wisconsin. And so he used to go over to Chicago quite a bit. And he was saying, Chicago is actually more expensive to live in than New York. And I was like, what? He said, yeah. So, when you're thinking about where you want to live, just kind of keep that in mind. It's very expensive. So I think
Yeah.
that's something to think about too, is when you're wanting to move, can you afford to be in that place? I know so many people, I want to go to New York. Oh, I want to go to LA, because I think that everything is going to be like Sex in the City,
Right.
or that you're going to live like a Kardashian, or, have something. And that's not the case. You cannot have like basically a budget for booze, which is $2, and live on like the Cristal lifestyle, or, the Moet lifestyle. Like that's not going to work. So keep that in mind. I think if there's something that we can teach you, make sure that you can actually afford where you're going, and that, if you are transitioning and your job is taking you there, is that salary going to be enough for you to actually live where you want to be?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that was one of the reasons why I was willing to move to LA and got caught up in the trap, because the first time I visited, one of my friends who worked with me at CNN in Atlanta, she invited me and another girl to visit her family in Malibu. And so we went and we stayed at her house in Malibu on the beach. And I was like, oh, this is so wonderful. Like, yes, if there's ever an opportunity to live in LA, then yeah, but then you move to LA and you're not living the Malibu life.
No.
No, had another friend from Atlanta when we were at CNN, went to go visit the same friend in Malibu, and it just so happened like she had already like left Atlanta and moved to back home to LA, and she was working for a company that had her like really mixed in with celebrities. So this friend who went to visit her was at John Bon Jovi's house hanging out, went to Quincy Jones's house for a party. And so she's thinking, oh no, this is the life. I want to live in LA because you get to do. She was originally from Houston, living in Atlanta, moved to LA thinking I get to hang out. No, 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 girlfriend.
Yeah.
She quickly realized that she was just living in LA, that she wasn't living the LA life.
Right.
So be careful, learn what's going on in those cities before you move. because like getting back to Illinois, Chicago is very, 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 very cold in the winter. And it's not the New York cold.
No,
That wind will kick your butt.
it's the negative 20.
Yeah, and it's windy. I mean, it gets to the bone, to the core.
Yeah.
So really think about that before you make those decisions. Understand the climate, because even in Texas, the climate in Houston is different than the climate in Dallas, even though they're only 4 hours away, because y'all are on the water down there. So you have that humidity that we don't have up here.
Yes, and a lot of flooding. On any given day, your streets can flood. The drainage system here, I don't know what's going on, but we have so many floods,
Yeah,
hurricanes, tornadoes, all of that coming through. And,
yeah,
when we go back to like talking about like the whole Midwest and the cold, even though I've come from Massachusetts, that's another type of cold in those areas. And it's so funny that growing up in retail, I'm not going to try to toot my own horn, but I used to, of course, be like in upper management, like store manager, area manager. So I was always, doing a really good job and loving what I did. So had some offers to go to different places. I was offered to go to Chicago in either there or New York to help open up those concept stores. And of course, I said I chose New York because, I was in that relationship as well. And then my brother was telling me about how expensive Chicago was. But then I also had gotten an offer to go and help open up some stores in Minnesota. One of them being, remember the Mall of America when that opened and how big that was,
yeah,
with having like the whole roller coaster and the Snoopy camp and inside the mall. So I think about that. And, again, it just, I want to plug my car up to my house to keep it together because it's
right.
so doggone cold. So
Yeah,
it's all of those things I thought about. And I'm so glad I didn't do that because I feel like I probably would have just like caved in and just died there on my own in my 20s without having any family or anything going on there, just being by myself. That would have been a brutal move. So definitely I would say to the younger people who are getting ready to graduate, even if it's high school and you're going off to college, try something that's a little bit different. Maybe not stay where you're from, but try to go someplace new. See what else is out there. Also, if you're in your 20s and maybe you've already graduated college and you're looking to start someplace else and you're applying for jobs, I would say figure out where you'd like to go and just, again, like Sanji said, do your research, see what's going on. I mean, now we have Google. That should be kind of like everybody's best friend. You can kind of Google, the price of housing or apartments or different things. See what's going on in that area and if it's really what you want. And I would also challenge you, go someplace different because it's nice to be around people that aren't like you. Even though I said I didn't love Georgia and it was a big culture shock for me, it did get me around more people of color. And that's something that I wasn't used to. Now being here in Texas, again, it's kind of like a mix of people, a pretty good mix. So I have white neighbors mostly. I have a couple of black neighbors. I have Asian neighbors. In my little cul-de-sac area, we have a little bit of everyone. I would say it's predominantly white, but there's still like a mix of people here in Houston and then a mix of people that I'm working around. So always try to go someplace where you can be around different people and learn about them and so that you're comfortable around everyone because I would say that's probably one of the things that I didn't like when I first moved to Georgia. I was meeting Black people that hadn't gone to like the north side of town because they were scared to be around white people. And I know that sounds silly, but I'm not saying anything against their fear. Maybe they had a bad experience, or maybe their parents taught them that, or someone's told them that they don't belong, they can't go there. So I don't know what the case was, but for me, that was so shocking and weird. And, I tell my mom, "Oh, I really just don't like this place. People, they don't like to get to know each other, but don't have that. You have to get to know people and be around people and understand different cultures." So I would say that's my charge to people. Please go out and start to get to know other people, because the more that we understand cultures and know what's going on with other people, then we lose the fear that maybe we were taught, or we lose the stereotypes of what maybe we see in the news. I think about you going to the Jewish school and growing up having so many Jewish friends and being able to say the prayers and knowing the culture. I don't know anyone else, like in my life, who can actually say that. And that's really cool to me. So I feel like the more that we branch out and we can get to know other people, then you know where they're coming from. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all human. That's the main thing. And so we learn from each other.
Yeah, it's all about experience. I gravitate to people who have vast experience of things in many different areas. You will hear me say over and over again until you're sick that experience is the mother of knowledge. So getting out there and experiencing different things will make you more intelligent. I can tell those here in Texas who have not left Texas. They've never left Texas. I can just hear it in the things that they say and in the things that they do. Same thing in Maryland. The people who have never left the state of Maryland or never left the city of Baltimore, I can always tell because they're lacking in experience, and that just limits them, and that's not something that I ever wanted for myself, and I certainly did not want for my children. My children got tired of me saying, "You are not going to college here in Texas. You are not." Even though great schools here in Texas, UT, top school, did not want them going to college here in Texas and really pushing them to go someplace else. So very, very happy that I had one that ended up in Georgia and one that ended up in Louisiana, and they are experiencing the differences there. My youngest, who's at LSU, is really learning Louisiana life, as most of the people who go to that university are from Louisiana. But you just have to get out and do different things and experience different cultures and people. And I really think that those who struggle with being racist, let's say,
Mhm.
I'm just going to go there.
Yeah.
It's because they haven't lived with people other than them, people who are just like them. Whereas those who go off to schools or those who go off and take a job in a different city where the people who live there are not like them, and then suddenly they're working in environments where their people are not like them, they learn more and they become more intelligent. And then they see that we're all just people. We all are just people sleeping in the bed, getting up, brushing our teeth, and going to work, and putting on our clothes and taking care of our families. We're all just people. But you will get stuck in your thinking and your mentality unintelligently because you haven't exposed yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm proud to say I've gone from north to south to west to east to southwest. It has really opened my eyes. I'm proud to say I went to a Jewish school. I'm proud to say I learned a lot of Black culture at University of Pennsylvania. I'm proud to say I learned a lot of Black culture in Atlanta. I'm proud to say that in LA, I really learned the chill, laid back life, and the people there are completely different. I learned the hustle and bustle and what that meant for people necessarily in New York, because there's a reason why they are that way, in New York. That has opened my mind to different things. And I only want that for my children, and I only want that for everybody else.
Absolutely. Get out and meet new people, and please just have an open mind. Don't say, "I'm not going to go here because it's this type of people." That doesn't make any sense. It's 2025. get out and make some friends and meet some people that do not look like you and don't have the same experience as you.
Yeah, that's why I push for and college isn't for everybody. It really isn't. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go to college, but I can tell you once you step outside of your podunk town and you go to a college or university, and now all of a sudden you're surrounded by Black people, Hispanic people, Asian people who came from all kinds, and you're like, whoa, you get to really see that the way you were thinking in your podunk town may not have been complete.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I push for a college education, not just for the education that it provides, but the exposure that you get to different kinds of people. Because even my son, who's going to Morehouse College right now, surrounded by all Black males, that school is very diverse,
Yeah.
even though they are all Black males, because they come from all different parts of the world, because they even have Africans who go there, different parts of the world, different parts of the country, different socioeconomic backgrounds. And he's like learning about different things, even though everybody there is a Black male. So,
Well, they actually don't they I know when my brothers were going there, they had a couple of people who were not Black going.
yeah,
So, I
yeah,
mean, even though it's a historically Black college, people need to know that there are still white people going to the school because it's a great school. It's not just that it's an HBCU, it's a great school.
right. And currently there are not many. There are
Yeah.
some, but even with most of the, 99% of them being Black males, the diversity is there. And so I want people to know that even going to an HBCU, don't think that, okay, it's the same old Black people. No, it's not.
No. And that's what something that we talked about in one of our shows that people they're on this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion thing, but they don't understand that you could have 13 Black men all in the same room and have 13 different perspectives. Everyone's
Right.
not going to be the same. So that's a perfect example of going to, an all male school, predominantly one race, and you're not going to have everybody there with the same experience because just look at us and our experience as Black women, being so completely different from a lot of women that we know.
Yeah, because even across the way at Spelman, there are the women there, some of whom are like me, who grew up in the Jewish community. They're Jewish Black girls,
Yeah.
and then they're in school with girls who came from LA and girls who might have come from the hood.
Yes.
And there are all kinds of women there, all mixed in together. And so that's why I just push for it, but not just for the educational value, but the exposure
Well, it's
that you
almost
get
an
to different people.
education in life,
Yes,
not just the school books, but it's an education in life that no matter where you go, you're going to have to get used to different people because we're all out
right.
here, you know? Yeah. So whatever you're
Yeah,
seeing in the news, I love it when people go, you're not like one of them. And it's just like, please.
yeah.
You
What's that
obviously don't
mean?
have any Black friends. You don't live near anybody Black, and maybe you need to get out more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Please, because those who have gotten out more can run circles around you if
Yeah.
you've spent your whole life in South Dakota
Yeah.
and you haven't left the place. Like, what do you
That's,
know?
you
You
know
can't
what?
teach me anything because you haven't learned anything other
That's
than what's going on in South Dakota. So, experience is the mother of knowledge. You don't have knowledge because all you know is
yeah.
where you came from. So, that
That's why
doesn't
I
help
used to
me.
laugh when people would call the Obamas elitist. And I'm like, oh, because they have an education, because they actually like made six figures in their job.
Right.
Okay, so you don't know anybody like that. So you
Please.
you you need to you need to get out more.
Yeah. Get out
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
and learn some things
Yeah.
because these
Absolutely.
people who have been out and about can tell you some stories just as we can, just as we have told stories. And I haven't gotten into the deep stories of my experience in LA or my experience in Philly, but there are stories there. And if we were to sit down and have a conversation over a cup of coffee at a Starbucks, I could tell you some stuff, and not bad. I'm just saying, just from what I know and what I learned from being in those different places, and what I know here in Texas. Never thought I'd live in Texas, and certainly not for so long. But it's been an experience, and it's been a joy, and we need to do a travel show, because just traveling to different places, going to Las Vegas and experiencing Nevada. The heat there will burn your skin, just going from the MGM over to the New York, just crossing that bridge will burn your skin. So heat is not heat.
You know
Heat
what?
is not the same. Just as you talked about cold in Massachusetts and cold in Illinois, they're totally different. The heat in Dallas is different than the heat in Nevada. Go experience that.
It's funny that you said that because, when you were asking me about transitioning from Georgia to Texas, when I came, like my husband and I, we came for an interview that I took. And at that time, I wore my hair like in a mohawk. So, of course, like the back was shaved to that, like the point of a mohawk. I got out of the car here and the sun hit the back of my head, and I actually thought that I was on fire.
Oh,
And Atlanta, I think for me, when you look at meteorologist reports, Dallas and Atlanta usually have like some of the same temperatures and same types of weather. But Houston and Atlanta, that sun is like completely different. It hit my head, and I really seriously thought that like I was on fire or a blowtorch had hit the back of my scalp.
mm.
It hurt so bad. And I was like, whoa. So yeah, that the sun is completely different, just as the cold is different. That was an eye opener for me coming here and experiencing that. Just getting out of a car to walk into a building and feeling that type of heat on the back of my neck and head. God, I will never
Yeah.
forget it.
Wow. So weather is it's all
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
It's all different. I remember sitting in an informational session when my son was deciding to go to LSU, and there was like a panel, and they were talking to students. And one of the questions that went to the students was, "What is the one thing you wish you had brought with you freshman year that you didn't have? Like, what should you have brought?" And the answer that one girl gave was very interesting to me. She said, "A boat." A
Uh,
boat. Like, what is she talking about?
flooding.
My son quickly learned after he moved down there, oh, it rains here a lot in the fall. And I remember I sent him with boots, and he thought that was just so stupid. Like, I'm never wearing those boots.
Was it
But
like
he didn't know.
the duck boots or the Wellington?
Just it's like the rubber, just a
Yeah.
black rubber boot that I
Yep.
gotten on Amazon, because that was on the list that the moms had sent out about things that you need if you're going to LSU. And I didn't know, like, okay, why boots? Why rubber boots? But now we know, because in Baton Rouge, it's going to rain a lot, and the rain fills up in the fall. So you need a good umbrella. You need a backpack that's waterproof, and you need a boat.
Oh my
She
God.
said. So again, the climate is different, and I think you're on the Gulf of Mexico and Baton Rouge, New Orleans, that whole area.
Is
You're
it
on the
still
Gulf of
Gulf?
Mexico.
Is it still Gulf of Mexico, Auntie?
I'm purposely calling it the Gulf of Mexico. It's the Gulf of Mexico.
It's like,
Okay. I
is
grew
it
up
still
with the
that?
Gulf of Mexico, and it's going
Look,
to remain
scratching
the
my head.
Gulf of Mexico to me.
Is it still that? Scratching my
Do
head.
we
Is it
really
still
need to
that?
go there? Yes, you, KJ, are on the Gulf of Mexico. My son, who is in Louisiana, is on the Gulf of Mexico, and y'all deal with a lot of precipitation,
Yeah.
to say, and flooding
Look,
on the Gulf of Mexico.
everybody's welcome to listen to the Girlie Ladies.
Yes, please.
Yes, everybody's welcome. But
Right.
I have jokes sometimes.
Yes. And if you're plugged in, you know exactly what we're talking about. But
Sure.
it's the Gulf of Mexico to me.
Okay. Okay. Just making sure. I
Yes.
thought it changed.
Not for me.
According to Google, I thought it changed. Yeah.
Okay. But
Yeah.
not for me.
Okay.
Okay. Well, on that note, what's the takeaway? What do we want people to really hear from us and understand from everything that we've talked about? We've talked about how we grew up in Massachusetts and in Maryland and how we've moved to different parts of the country. What do we want people to take away from what we shared today?
Um, no fear. I mean, that's simple. No fear. Again, I'm grateful to my parents for pushing us to see something different and not being like those helicopter parents that, oh no, just stay, pushing us to get out. My mom bought me a one-way ticket, told me to go. So it's just have no fear and then get to know people. And of course, wherever you're going, like if you do want to go to Massachusetts, that's someplace I'll always love and respect. And there's a lot to see. Get out of Massachusetts, go see the Plymouth Rock, which is now a pebble, but it's still there. Go see, go hang out because that whole little area is nice. It's like a little beachy area and there's history. So, go. The Cheers bar in Boston, it's a real bar. It's just not called Cheers, but it is a real bar. And right before you get to that bar, there is a beautiful statue from the movie Glory of a few of the troop. And it's beautiful. It's a bronze sculpture of the Black troops. Anyone who's seen that movie Glory, I could only watch it once. I won't watch it again. It's too much for me.
Yeah, that's a
But
tough one.
yeah, it's a tough one. But there is a beautiful bronze statue in their honor. So if you're walking to the Cheers bar, you will pass that, which is beautiful. Again, New England Conservatory of Music there, #2 school behind Juilliard in the country. So it's a lot. Harvard, MIT, Tufts, all of your schools, Northeastern. It's pretty cool, and you're close to Rhode Island. So that's always cool too. If you want to go to Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, it's a great area. I recommend it. But again, be fearless. Get out there, get to know people, mingle with different people from different cultures. If you don't know something, the best thing to do is ask. Because if there's something that I don't understand about a culture, I will ask, hey, I don't know this. Would you mind explaining it to me? Because I'd like to understand. And when you ask people, okay, sure, no problem. So I feel like that's the best thing to do. If you're uncertain, be curious and ask, but make sure that you ask first so that you're not offending someone, especially if they're closed off and don't want to tell you about their religion or something, about their culture. But I would say if you can, ask the questions, get to know people so that you can lose that stereotype or, trope or whatever it is that's going on with different people. Be comfortable.
Yeah. And I would say that if you just hang out where you are, you're really limiting yourself and you're living in your own ignorance. I don't mean to be so harsh, but it's the truth. I will continue to say that experience is the mother of knowledge, and you really need to get out and about and experience different cultures, different people, different ways of life. There's so much going on here, even in this country. You don't need to leave this country to experience different cultures and different things. Just going from north to south, east to west will change the game in your mind as to really what life in America is all about. because you may think you know what life in America is all about. But if you're living in your same world, surrounded by the same people who look like you, raised like you don't know anything.
Yes.
I think you do, but you really don't. So I am happy to have moved around. I encourage others to do the same, especially those who are approaching and entering your retirement years and you are looking for a place to settle down. Yeah, you can settle down right there in that same old town where you are. Not exciting. Or you can get up and you can maybe move to a different coast or from north to south and really open your eyes to what life in America is all about. So, we hope you found our conversation as insightful and thought provoking as we did. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe, leave a comment, click the link that says text the show. Your feedback means the world to us.
Thank you so much. We hope that you learned a lot about our country and some cool places to live and what they have to offer. And we can't wait to see you next time. But again, please make sure you subscribe. That way you'll know when all new shows are popping up. Please make sure that you tell your friends as well.
Yes, and you can always follow us on social media. You can find us at the Girlie Ladies on Instagram. You can find me at Sanji Cosby at Sanji Cosby on Facebook, on Instagram. And how about you, KJ?
Sure. I'm at the KJB Effect. It's EFFECT on Instagram.
Yes. And you can also go on our website, thegirlieladies.com. You can always get our episodes there, get caught up. If you're behind, we want you to get caught up, listen to our shows, and keep up to date on everything that we are doing. But in the meantime, we want you to keep questioning, keep exploring, and most of all, keep growing. Thank you for listening to our show.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.